see one hand over there. Yeah, I didn't know before I did some research, so you're not alone. Most of us don't know them, but I'd like to introduce you briefly to the Ahachiman and the Tongva peoples. We're going to talk to them a little bit more in the future. And this area was probably settled by both of them. Both of them sort of come from this area. Now, Robin Kimmerer, from our reading, she's of the Potawatomi Nation, which was originally from the Great Lakes, but they were forcibly moved to the plains in the 19th century. And the Ahachiman and the Tongva and the Potawatomi, though, they have a lot in common, as do a number of indigenous tribes. And what they have in common is a worldview, that of having a relationship with the earth and all beings on it. Now, this is kind of a very different from the Western way of thinking, which isn't all bad. The Western way of culture gets a really bad rap these days. It's not all bad. There's a lot of good things that come out of it. But one of the things, if you notice in the reading, right, Robin, she talks about Cartesian dualism, right? That as scientists, we kind of have this dualistic way of looking at the world. And that's one of the Western ways of thinking. In fact, we can thank this guy here, Plato, who came up with this idea of dualism a long time ago. And he basically said there's a material world and there's kind of a spiritual world. He didn't use the word spiritual. It was sort of this idealized world that we have in our head. So if you think of chair, that's idealized. But then there's the material world, which unfortunately he sort of said was kind of not the best part. You can see where Christianity kind of really ran with this, right? So he said that, material world is sort of the fallen world. It's not the best part. There's instead a more idealized world. And unfortunately, this was what started this dualistic kind of thinking, that there's this either or, and there's this good or bad. So ever since Plato, we from the Western world, we've been creating more and more of these either or scenarios. And part of it, we see ourselves as apart from the world rather than as a part of it, right? We've lost our sense of interdependence, our connectedness. Let me give you some examples of dualistic thinking. Dualistic thinking says that there's only two options. You're in or you're out. You're for or against, whatever that means, Democrats, Republicans, black, white. In fact, our computers are based on a binary dualistic systems, a computations of zeros and ones. Dualism posits that there's only two answers, and unfortunately the problem is that it creates a hierarchy, that one is better than the other, right? And dualism in of itself, we encounter it every day, right? Do I turn left or do I turn right for the grocery store? In and of itself is not necessarily a bad thing. It's when we take it in our mind that there's only two choices for anything. And it creates this sense of hierarchy, right? Yeah. Which sort of subconsciously makes us think that there must be this win-lose, good-bad scenario that permeates our lives. It's kind of hard to see our way beyond that. And even our concepts of gender have been affected by this. We used to think there was only two genders, male and female, right? And by creating that simple, seemingly innocuous dualism, not only have we negated the biodiversity that is actually out there in the world across all species, but we've created a system where one gender gets treated better than another. That's the challenge of dualistic thinking. Now, most indigenous cultures, and let me caveat, by the way, by saying that I don't want to over-romanticize indigenous cultures. They've got their own issues as well, and there's a lot of things going on there. But the one thing that the majority of them have in common, and not all, but a majority of them, sort of the Ahachiman, the Tongva, and the Potawatomi, is that they strive to live in a non-dualistic world. They try to create a more inclusive kind of world. That instead of an either-or worldview, they work with a both-and worldview. And that's kind of hard for us to sometimes get our head around. Like, how do you change a worldview? So let me explain a little bit by using an example. So one of our dualistic ways in our culture is that we struggle with this idea of scarcity and abundance, right? The scarcity worldview says that there isn't enough time, money, resources, or even love. and I got to take care of number one, right? At its extreme, it can be a kind of hoarding or miserliness. But I want to acknowledge that there's some truth to scarcity. We do need to take care of our needs first, right? We all learn that on an airplane, right? Put the mask on first and then take care of others, right? It's okay to want to take care of yourself. I don't want to say that there isn't that. But scarcity, when we really head down that road, comes from a place of fear. It's often a fear of imagined future hurts. So let me give you an example of that. This happened in this last week to me. I thought, oh, here's a good example when I'm preaching on this. So I got my hair cut this last week, and I was talking to my hairdresser, and she's really wonderful. I've known her now for about 5 years, and she was married when I met her, and unfortunately she's gotten a divorce and everything. So I was asking her, I said, so are you dating? And she said, oh yeah, I met this really great person on Bumble. And then, which I'd never heard of Bumble before. It's a dating site. It's actually kind of cool because women make the first move, so it cuts down on harassment, so it's actually very empowering for women. And she's like, Sean, you should do it. You should do it. You're single, right? Now, my first reaction was, oh, I don't have enough time. I mean, I live such a busy life, I don't have enough time. Okay, you all know, right, that that's not the reason. I mean, anybody who's ever had to put themselves out there for dating, right, you know that there's fear, right? And I thought, basically, I'm 53 years old, I'm a minister, who do you want to date, a minister? And it's that scarcity mentality, right? That there's not enough love in the world for me, right? I mean, I was like, Sean, really? So there's so that's scarcity. So then there's this reaction to this scarcity worldview, right? Which is the abundance theologies and the abundance worldviews out there. That it's not just that there's enough for you, but you can have everything you ever dreamed of. And if you just put it out there to the world, if you pray it, if you meditate it, change your attitude, the world will be at your feet. Now, I do think that, like scarcity, there's some truth to this. I think that if you want to work towards something, I think attitude plays a huge part of it. I think putting energy out into the universe is a good thing. If hope is going to survive, we've got to keep moving on, praying on. We do need to do that, right? Attitude will help you be successful, but it isn't everything. As someone who's been happily single and putting it out there for what I'd like to be I'd like to be coupled for the last 10 years, wishful thinking isn't just going to work, right? So these two worldviews are often at odds with one another, and of course we think abundance should. We all want abundance, right? But I kind of think of it as illusionary. So here you've got scarcity versus abundance. Scarcity comes out swinging with fear and anger, while abundance counters with denial and illusion. Who's going to be the grand champion? Maybe we don't have to duke it out. Maybe there's another way of seeing this world and all that it has in store for us in a different way, a third way. And this is where I think is what we can learn from our indigenous brothers and sisters, the Hachiman and the Tongva, who lived right here on this land. They knew how to live into a constant state of gratitude. A constant state of gratitude. What these worldviews teach us is that we don't have to live in this hierarchical either-or way of thinking of good, bad, abundance, scarcity. We can embrace both and kind of thinking. One that gets us away from feeling like we're duking it out all the time, but instead looks for ways to express gratitude toward ourselves and the earth. And we have a word for this third way, this non-dualistic way of thinking. It's called sharing. Right? And I think this is in part what we can learn from indigenous peoples, among other things. It's not about scarcity or abundance, but about sharing what we have. Sharing is not about giving up all that you have or hoarding all that you have. It's about coming from a place of trust, of generosity, with both the other and yourself as well, right? And have you never noticed that when little kids share something with you, They don't give you everything, right? He's holding one cookie back, right? But he wants to share the joy of this cookie with you. You know, and I've noticed it also, like when they created a picture and they want to share it with you, they have this joy of creating this picture, and then they want to pass on this joy to you, right? Sharing isn't about hierarchy. It isn't about one being better than the other. Sharing is an impulse of love. And in fact, most great religions actually talk about this third way, the both and worldview. In the Jewish faith, for example, they encourage farmers to leave the edges of their fields for those in need. Those are called the gleanings, right? And in Christianity, we have the parable of the loaves and fishes. And if you read the story of Mark, where the loaves and the fishes, you know the miracle of the loaves and fishes, right? There were 2 fishes and 5 loaves and 5,000 people, and suddenly everybody was fed, right? It's kind of interesting. Nowhere in this story does it say that he multiplied them, that he performed some great miracle. But you had a bunch of people, 5,000 is probably an exaggeration, but you had a bunch of people and they all shared what they had. And that was the miracles, that they listened to his stories of hope and love and decided to share. And these Jewish and Christian teachings are like these indigenous ways of knowing. They were people much more close to the land than what we live today. We live in these constructed worlds, right? Kind of far from it. And while they use the word God to describe what was going on, and the modern indigenous people use the words Mother Earth to talk about love, about that feeling of love that is shared. And I think that indigenous ways of knowing is so needed at this time in this world. And that's why I'm kind of fascinated with the internet, with all of these different ways that people are allowed to share. With all the problems it's giving people the power to make a difference. To share just a little bit, doesn't have to be a lot, just a little bit, of what they have to help others. To share goods, I mean there's like Free Cycle, there's all these sites out there, I'm kind of amazed. It's a start. You know, we Unitarian Universalists, right, we have, as being also one of the world's great religions, we have the 7th principle. We affirm and promote the interdependent web of existence of which we are a part. And how do we affirm and promote that? Right? And we do that by sharing. Not just our money, our time, and our love with one another. That's what we do. I like to think that to affirm and promote is to live in a constant state of gratitude. Because imagine what this world would be like if we didn't hoard our resources, but shared them responsibly. If we didn't fear that there wasn't enough all the time, and we didn't just go about with sort of wishful thinking, but instead each of us looking at what we have and sharing what we have, coming from that impulse of love. So what does that mean for me and Bumble? What if I reframed my fear in the light of sharing? What if instead of wondering if there's enough love out there for me, which is fear-based, what if instead I ask, well, wait a minute, how much love do I have to offer the world? To share with the world? Because I got a lot. And what if we saw this world as both material and spiritual in nature? That it feeds us food and it nurtures our souls. That the earth gives us all that we need to survive and she loves us. If we want hope to survive in this world today, then every day we've got to pray, march, sing, teach, work, and share. Because in the end, we're all in this together, right? This church, in fact, exists because all of you share, right? I've got a job, Beth has a job, we've got a roof over our heads this morning because all of you share. And here's the thing, you know, in Unitarian Universalism, right, you share not because of an impulse of fear. We don't really believe in hell, right? At least not an afterlife of hell. So it has to come from an impulse of love. So thank you. That's the outcoming of sharing, right, is gratitude. So thank you, everyone. Right now, our dualistic way of thinking, that either or, male versus female, Republican versus Democrat, material versus spiritual, that way of thinking is destroying our planet, and it's hurting people. So let's work toward a different way, a way that comes from that impulse of love, and from there maybe we too can live in a constant state of gratitude. May it be so, blessed be, and amen. Let us sing.